That evening, he contented himself merely with checking the allies before Guinea. The imperial headquarters were established for the night in the village. The troops who followed continuing defiling until the next morning, when General Traitors' dragoons, who had been detached from the army in Spain, appeared on the Paris road. This reinforcement of cavalry could not have arrived more opportunely. During the night, couriers were dispatched to convey the gratifying intelligence to Paris. They entered the suburbs, escorted by crowds of people who had anxiously assembled at Charenton round the carriages of the great park, for the equipages of the Duc de Belluno and Reggio had been repulsed to this last position. On the morning of the 17th, our troops quitted Guinea and marched forward. From the energy of the movement, the Allies learned that Napoleon had returned. His presence imparted new spirit to the whole army. General Girard's infantry, General Drouet's artillery, and the cavalry of the army of Spain performed prodigies. The enemy's columns were driven back upon each other, and in their rout they left the road between Montmartre and Provins covered with the slain. The Russians retreated on Nogent, pursued by the Duke of Reggio and the Count de Valmy. The Duke de Taranto chased the enemy in the direction of Bray. General Girard drove the Bavarians at the point of the sword beyond Villeneuve-le-Comte and Dunmarie. Finally, the Duc de Belluno advanced in the direction of Montereau, with orders to carry the bridge. That same evening, the Imperial Guard bivouacked round Angers, and the Emperor slept at the castle. In the course of the evening, the Prince of Neuchâtel informed Napoleon that an Austrian officer had arrived with a message from Prince Schwarzenberg. This was Count Parr. The object of his mission was to obtain a suspension of hostilities, and he waited at the advanced posts for an answer. Napoleon, encouraged by the advantages he had just obtained, now conceived the hope of avoiding the delays of a congress. The transmission of a letter from the Empress to her father, and this mission of Count Parr afforded him the opportunity of writing directly to the Emperor of Austria. And of this opportunity he availed himself. The Privy Council, which had been consulted at Paris respecting the propositions of Châtillon, were unanimously of opinion that France should submit. But Napoleon thought it was now time to set aside the pretensions which Archduke at Brienne had encouraged the Allies to put forward. In the letter Napoleon wrote from Angers to the Emperor of Austria, he emphatically declared his wish speedily to bring matters to an amicable arrangement, but he hinted that after the favorable changes that had occurred in the state of his affairs, he expected that the negotiations would be founded on more conciliatory basis than those that had been proposed at Châtillon. Napoleon at the same time directed that dispatch should be sent off to the Duc de Vicenza, informing him that when he was furnished with carte blanche, it was to save the capital, but that Paris was now saved, that it was to avoid a battle, but that the battle had been fought, that his extraordinary powers could now have no object, they were revoked, and that the future negotiations must follow the usual course. Napoleon's thoughts were now wholly turned on the direct negotiations which he had entered upon with his father-in-law. His hopes were now heightened by new military successes. On the morning of the 18th, Napoleon learned that the Duc de Belluno was not yet in possession of the bridge at Montereau, and therefore he himself immediately advanced in that direction. The Bretagne National Guard and General Pujol's cavalry at the same time received orders to come up upon Montereau by the road of Melun. The Duc de Belluno had in the morning presented himself before Montereau, but he was too late, for the Württemberg troops had established themselves there during the night. Bianchi's Austrian corps had advanced on the other side of the Seine as far as Fontainebleau, but fearing a check from the French advance guard, it had hastily fallen back on Fossard, Villeneuve-les-Goyards, and Sens. The Württemberg troops covered this movement. The Duc de Belluno made vain efforts to carry the position. His son-in-law, the brave General Château, was mortally wounded in the first attack. General Girard came up in time to support the action, and Napoleon himself arrived in time to decide the victory. Our troops took possession of the heights of Serville. which command the confluence of the Seine, and the Yonne batteries were mounted with artillery of the ground, which dealt destruction on the Württemberg force in Montereau. Napoleon himself pointed the guns and directed the firing. The enemy made vain endeavors to dismount our batteries. His balls hissed like the wind over the heights of Sevilla. The troops were fearful lest Napoleon, attracted by the habits of his early life, should expose himself to danger. On this occasion, he made the following remark, which is engraven on the recollections of the gunners of the French army. "Come on, my brave fellows, fear nothing. The ball that is to kill me is not yet cast." We redoubled our firing, and not one of the windows of the little castle Sevilla withstood the commotion. Protected by our formidable artillery, the Britannia National Guards established themselves in the suburbs of Milan, and General Pajot carried the bridge by so vigorous a charge of cavalry that the enemy had not even time to blow up a single arch. The Württemberg troops, thus confined and exposed to destruction in Montereau, vainly summoned the Austrians to their aid. This engagement was one of the most brilliant of the whole campaign. Our success at once supported the ardor of our troops, roused the enthusiasm of the country people, and excited to the utmost degree the devotedness of our young officers. But it was remarked with regret that returning hope had not yet enlivened the hearts of most of the old chiefs of the army. In proportion as circumstances proved favorable, they seemed to entertain a greater apprehension for the future. Their prudence seemed to have augmented with their fortunes. The poorest, on the contrary, were now the most confident. The difference of resolution with which each individual viewed impending events presented the most painful contrast, and was a source of bitter vexation to Napoleon. Unfortunately, the bravest men were those of whom the emperor had most cause to complain. At the Battle of Nangis, a movement of cavalry which would have proved fatal to the Bavarians failed, and the blame attached to General Leretier, a man distinguished for his intrepidity. On the preceding evening, the enemy had surprised some pieces of artillery at the bivouac, and they had been confided to the care of the brave General Guyot, commander of the chasseurs of the guard, at Sevilla during the heat of the engagement. There was a want of ammunition on the batteries, and this negligence, which by the rigid laws of the artillery amounted to a crime, was attributable to General de Gillon, one of our most distinguished artillery officers. The forest of Fontainebleau was abandoned to the Cossacks without resistance. General Montbrun was accused of not having taken sufficient advantage of either his position or his adversaries. To sum up all, perhaps the Battle of Montereau might have been unnecessary, and all the bloodshed it cost might have been saved if on the preceding day our troops had come up with sufficient expedition to surprise the bridge. But fatigue prevented them from arriving in time, and the Duc de Belluno, formerly the indefatigable Marshal Victor, was so unfortunate as to be compelled to urge this excuse.